I'm Mr. X, and together with my assistant Barry,
Well, hi.
we will take you through your journey to become a better chess player. From beginner to expert level, we're here to assist you.
Today, some people call him Drawnish, but in this top 10 he shows he's an exceptional player. Anish Giri's most brilliant moves. Number 11.
I know this is a top 10, but if there's just another amazing game, then why not show it to you? So this is a great example of how to open a pawn chain. Look at this. Bishop takes c4. Black takes, of course, and I think this is very instructive. Giri pushes the pawn to d5, and now if you would take with the pawn, there's a check, and the knight is hanging. And this is a no-go, right? Because now h6 follows, and that's a disaster. So instead, black takes here, counter offense, which is interesting. Takes back, takes here, and white has a beautiful center with this pawn and has the initiative. And of course, Giri went on to convert this game. Great.
Number 10.
The first one of the top 10, and I think it's a great starter because here Giri plays bishop takes g6! Exclamation mark. Why? Well, if you would take back, there's a check, and the king is on the h file, very vulnerable, therefore a check, and this is simply a checkmate with the rook or the queen, you can choose. So that's not an option, therefore black plays bishop f3. This pawn is still covered, so it's not checkmate yet. Giri takes the knight, of course. Now black has to cover against the checkmate here. Rook g1 with a nice discovered attack over here. King in the corner, and still bishop e4. An amazing move. Why? White is threatening check, and if takes with the pawn, there's a fork on the king and the rook, which we will see, because this is how it went. The bishop was taken, check on g7, black took, and Giri takes with the pawn with a check. Nice fork, winning the rook with a check on the king, with the queen and the rook. Black has to take, and then loose pieces drop off. There's a nice loose piece in the middle of the board, and Giri takes the bishop and of course won this game.
Now, number 9.
I think in this game Giri played a nice thematic sacrifice. It's one to remember. And he played it right away after h4, trying to attack Giri's king side. It's the rook takes on e3. The bishop falls, and if you take back, you see these pawns. They're super weak and easy targets, and that's the idea of Giri behind this sacrifice. And I think what's next is a masterclass in how to utilize these kind of positions. Queen e7, the other queen comes forward, and with g4, knight h2 and h5, white is simply so bad. This knight is never gonna go anywhere for the moment. Beautiful position for Giri. Look at these pawns.
8.
In this game, Giri plays against none other than nepomniachtchi, 2 times contender for the World Championship, and see how Giri crushes him in this game. After queen d2, Giri plays knight c3. Do you see it? If you simply take the knight, then there's a fork over here, winning the queen. So that's not what Jan did. He took the knight, and now there's a nice pawn for Giri in the center of the board. I want to show you a few more moves, because there's another brilliant move in this game. Giri wants to win this pawn back. King forward, making some room for the king, trying to get the open file. Rook here. And now Giri has this amazing rook on the second rank of Jan. And now Jan plays this move, basically giving away his queen, but if you take, then your queen hangs with check. So instead, Giri plays rook e2. If you take with the bishop, then the queen hangs, because this is no longer working. If you take with the rook, then you can take back with the knight. If you take back here, then your queen hangs. So instead, Jan moved his queen, and Giri went back with his knight, attacking the queen, and has a pawn extra on the board. And of course, Giri went on to win this game.
7. This is my favorite.
What I like so much about this top 10 of Giri is that he plays against top and really top players. So it shows his class. Here he plays against Jan Krzysztof Duda, a very strong Polish grandmaster, top 10 of the world. And here Duda plays bishop a3, attacking the rook. And as you can see, there's a lot of activity along the b file. And instead of, playing the rook away and giving away some of his activity, there's a check. And Giri simply plays knight g3. And what happens if Duda just takes the rook? Then there's a mate in 2. So that's not what Duda did. Instead, he played rook a6, but then there's a check on b5. King has to move. There's a check on b8. King comes forward. Now there's a check. Now the rook comes in. If you would have moved it away, then you would not have this activity. The rook takes back. And do you see the mate? Giri did check. Bishop takes. And checkmate. What a beauty of a game.
6. I'm nervous.
Okay, we haven't really seen a queen sacrifice yet, so let's show a queen sacrifice, because also Giri sacrifices his queen. Obviously, black here takes the knight on g6, and Giri sacrifices the queen on h6. Why? Well, if you take, then this is simply mate. Well done. If you go into the corner, which black actually did, then you take the bishop, and yeah, you cannot really prevent the checkmate on h7. For example, if you would take, don't take back with the rook, because then there's a check here. You can get in between with your queen, and you lose your initiative, and you're a pawn down, and these pawns are really good. But if you take back with the queen, you have to protect the knight for checkmate, for example like this. But then there's multiple moves. This one seems to be working out just fine, and the knight will fall or checkmate will follow anytime soon.
I visited Giri at his house, which I offered to buy for you, Mr. X. He declined. Number 5.
In this game, Giri plays against Hikaru Nakamura. Check out the top 10 most brilliant moves of Hikaru Nakamura. We got a lot of nice comments on this video, so check it out. But here, Giri destroys Nakamura with knight f2, exclamation mark. Because if the king would go to g1, then you can simply take the bishop, and this is a checkmate on the back rank, because this rook is pinned. So instead, Nakamura took the knight on f2, but then you can just simply take the bishop. That's what Giri did. And if you take back, then there's a check and the checkmate on the back rank. And if you don't do that and defend your rook, then this rook is simply hanging and you win the game. Incredible how Anish crushed Hikaru Nakamura in this game.
Number 4.
This is just a great game. You know, the calculation it requires for Giri to play the next brilliant moves is just amazing. Okay, first it starts with pawn takes on g6, and now there's a knight to d2. Why is this good? It looks a bit like a quiet move, but it's not, because you're threatening a family fork here with the rook, the queen, the king. So there's a lot to be taken care of by white. After queen e7, threatening some checkmates here. So you need to be very sharp and very accurate as black. Well, that's of course what Giri is. It's a check, and Giri takes the rook because there's a check. So you cannot take the knight back. The king has to come up. Another check. Now the king goes back, and see, there's another discovery looming here. Check. So come forward. So remember, when Giri played knight to e2, he had to see this, because this knight is covering the two checkmate squares. It's just unbelievable, I would say. Now the queen comes in, There is not even a check at the moment on this board for white. Queen comes in, takes a knight, and with this move, attacking the queen and trying to give checkmate, white resigned, because whether you go to, let's say you go here, there's a check, and if the knight gets in between, there's a bishop here. If you cover, it's check, and checkmate over here. And if you would go here, it's a checkmate on g3. What a beautiful game.
Number 3. Getting there.
I remember watching this game live, because I'm quite of a Giri fan, and here he simply crushes Artemiev, also a super good player. So it looks so easy, but it's so difficult, because here he just plays knight to b3. Can you believe it? Just giving up the knight, because it can be taken. Well, if you don't take, by the way, there's a checkmate here, right? So remember that. And you cannot take with the pawn, because it's pinned. So, of course, Artemiev took the knight, but then what? You know, what's the follow-up? Well, perhaps you saw that this pawn is weak, and that was the reason why Giri started the sequence after all. You can take, and then if the king moves here, you can take back the knight. Alright, you know, that's an exchange of knights basically. But the king position is super weak now. Do you see the winning sequence? After bishop d3, queen to a8, you have to get in between. If you don't, then this is crushing as well, and not an improvement. So the bishop gets in between, and then there's a nice check on a2 because of the pin. You take, the bishop takes, and this bishop is now being attacked. If you try to defend the bishop, then you can simply give a check on c1, the king comes forward, and there's a beautiful check over here, and you have to put the queen in between, and this is over. What a game.
What an absolute genius, Mr. X. Number 2. Woohoo.
There's a lot of nice sacrifices, but I think this is just one of the most beautiful sacrifices I've ever seen. Look at this. After knight c5, what about rook d3? You know, it's just, it's defended by the pawn and the knight. Okay, the pawn is being pinned. So, but let's check out what happens if you actually take the rook. It's just in the middle of the board. It's unbelievable. Okay, well, so what if you take? Well, there's a long sequence of moves. You take back. So, okay, good. Rook comes forward, check. And here you play back the bishop and see how this bishop is very weak. So after this check, you can win this bishop. And this is a winning position with such a weak king. All right. So, but remember, so after rook to d3, this is what Giri saw already. So white goes to e2 with the king, but then there's a check on g3. And this knight is covered, and the king doesn't have any squares to go to anymore. Because his rook is still covered, right? So you have to take the knight, and then with the check, yeah, now the king goes here, and you take the queen, and yeah, this will be a checkmate at some point. Such an incredible game by Giri. Unbelievable. What an amazing and beautiful sacrifice.
And last, number 1, land in sight.
It's hard to really understand this game and to understand what's going on. Because after queen f6, you know, this rook is hanging, this rook is hanging, you know what's going on? And instead of taking the rook, Giri plays bishop to c2. That's just unbelievable. So what happens if you take, then there's a check, and yeah, what if you go here? Well, we will see actually, because this is similar to how the game ended. So white played king c1. Well, then you simply take the pawn on e2. Yeah, let's take a pawn while your rook is hanging. If you take it like white did, then you go forward with the king. And then you just simply try to trade off queens. But of course, that's not what you want. You just give away your queen and you move the pawn forward to b3. So that if you actually take the queen, yeah, well, then it's checkmate, obviously. You know, that's what all of us already saw when we played bishop c2 and we decided not to take the rook instead. Obviously, this is just madness. Incredible.
Thanks for watching and don't forget to subscribe. We're out of here. Bye.